to another video. So today's video I am really excited to do, and it correlates with another podcast episode that I had done. I think it was about maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. I'll link it down below and post the date, but I am going to be talking and showing some pieces from my vintage Hollywood collection. Now, this will more than likely be 2 videos, but these are pieces that I had only ever dreamed of owning, and the pieces that I will be showing in this video will be from 2 of my favorite actresses growing up, even to today, Elizabeth Taylor and Debbie Reynolds. Now, a little bit of the story about how I acquired these pieces. Again, I don't know where I got it in my head, but I've obviously always loved Elizabeth Taylor and Debbie Reynolds. I grew up religiously watching their movies, following their lives, reading all of their biographies, and one day it just popped into my head. I'm just gonna Google to see if maybe I can find any of Elizabeth Taylor's pieces online to own. Now, I knew that she had passed away in 2011, and they did a very big auction of a lot of her jewelry, her clothing, numerous items. So I knew that these pieces were out floating around. And when I Googled it, it just so happened that the amazing business Julian's Auctions was doing a Hollywood Legends auction in the next couple of months, and I saw this as my opportunity to maybe own a piece of hers. Now, I'd purchased from Julian's Auctions before. I wasn't new to their site, and I knew of them, but made my first purchase from them when the collection and archive of Doris Raymond, who owns The Way We Wore Vintage, who's in LA Rock Stars, if you've ever seen that. She was auctioning off pieces from her archive, and she was who I still look up to as who I want to be as a vintage shop owner and as a business owner. And I signed up for Julian's Auctions, became a registered bidder, and was able to acquire pieces from her archive. So that already got me into the water with Julian's Auctions and how all of that worked. But I didn't know enough about the website to constantly be checking in on it. So I was very happy to see that they were having their Hollywood Legends auction coming up, and Elizabeth Taylor's pieces were part of that auction. Now, I saw what the estimated prices were going to be for the particular pieces of hers that were up, and I spent a month and a half just writing down my plan of action and what I most wanted and ranked them, what my budget was. And that's the biggest question I get when I talk to people about these pieces is how much did you spend on them? Now, I hate talking about stuff like that, but if you want to know, you can Google these pieces and you can easily find out. With auctions, you have buyer's premiums, you have shipping, so there are all these added costs. So I knew that I had to be very, very prepared financially and have an plan of action, because these pieces can sometimes just blow up in terms of how much people are bidding on them. So I knew I had to have just this accumulation of cash on hand that I could get these pieces, and it meant so much to me to own something from Elizabeth Taylor that I didn't really care. I needed to find some way to own these. Now, I've talked about in other videos that I've been a collector since I was a child, and it's kind of a catch-22 because growing up, I was often called a hoarder. Even though I collected a lot of pieces, they always had a space and a home. Nothing was gathering in a heap on my floor. I had honored places for everything, but I knew a lot of the pieces I was just accumulating were not going to be mine forever. I saw that there was going to be a bigger purpose for these, and when I opened my shop, I had a lot of on-hand inventory, but it still felt like there were pieces I had that were going to be used for something greater, a bigger purpose. And when I saw this auction coming up, I knew that I had to start selling some pieces of my collection so I could actually pay for these items. Now, I went through my shop's archive, I went through my personal collection, and I started selling off jewelry pieces, any pottery that I had, brand name vintage pieces, you name it. I was selling it in store and on my eBay so I could just keep saving up money for this auction, so I knew that I could at least get one piece from her. So a couple months went by. It was the day of the auction, and I remember being at the shop. It was during shop hours. I believe it was a Saturday. And I was just glued to the auction, and you can join the live auction. You can pre-bid. I never pre-bid. I wait till the day of the auction. It's just personal preference. Some people have a different strategy. That's just the one that I've always latched onto. And I was on there watching it, I think for, oh gosh, at least by the time I logged off, it had been 5 hours. I had customers coming in, but all of a sudden I had my list. I had things that I had to let go because they were just creeping up to the thousands of dollars. I couldn't afford that. But then I came to this beautiful, beautiful green coat. And I believe it was from the 1970s that Elizabeth Taylor wore. And I was in love, and I knew I had to gun for that. Condition wise, it was missing some buttons. Obviously she had worn it, and I knew I had to act. But at the same time, I had customers coming in. Again, I was at work, so that took precedence over what I was doing on my computer. But somehow the stars aligned to when there was a slight break in customers. This coat came up, and I knew I had to get it. And I did get into a little bit of a bidding back and forth with another buyer, but eventually they stopped bidding. I won the coat, and the rest is history. Now, this coat on its own, if it didn't belong to Elizabeth Taylor, it's already a very stunning, sharp coat. This amazing green, very similar to the one that I'm wearing. It's called a raincoat because it has that oil type slick feel to it. The beautiful autumnal color silk lining. She bought it, from what I could see, it's a Count Romy coat made in Italy, and I believe she got it at Saks Fifth Avenue. I'll post here if I got that wrong. Again, when I did the podcast episode, this was super fresh in my mind, so my facts were a lot better, but I'll also post the archive post to the actual garment and all of the information about it in the description box. But all I cared about is that she owned it. And when you look at the coat, it's missing a button, but there's also a button that appears. The little acrylic resin type part of the button had fallen off at one point, was glued back on, and there's a fingerprint right in the middle of the glue. Now, I can't validate any of this, but I would like to think that that could have been her fingerprint gluing it back on. I'll never know. But this did come directly from her estate, and I was very excited to have it. It's in my showcase in my shop. I adore it. It's one of my favorite pieces that I own. It's the one that people gravitate towards the most, and when they see it, they immediately see the color and the look and the style. They don't necessarily see first that it belonged to Elizabeth Taylor. Now, the other garment I purchased was one that I wasn't planning on purchasing. It was in one of the lots that I was bidding for, one of the auctions that I was bidding in. And I saw it, but I thought, I don't know, I felt like it was maybe going to go for more than what I was anticipating, and it was a bra from 1953 that was worn by Debbie Reynolds. Now, this came from, I believe, a private collector. It didn't directly come from the auction of her estate after she passed, And all I knew is it came from the MGM costume lot. It had her name written into it, MGM scene and call number, and it had obviously been worn. It was in very rough condition, but again, they tell you that. It's called a pre-condition report. All of that is stated, and you know what you're buying is something that was worn and was a piece of fashion and costume history. Now, when that came up for bid, I saw that I was getting in a little bit of a bidding war with someone, but I love Debbie Reynolds. I, especially as an adult, appreciated her foresight to seeing all of the costumes she had rescued from film studios that were and threatened to be thrown or destroyed. She purchased and saved, which is why we have Marilyn Monroe's beautiful white dress. We have pieces from Cleopatra. She really saw the importance of fashion, costume, and film history. She never got the credit she deserved in life, even in death. I don't believe she fully gets the credit that she deserves. So this piece, Debbie Reynolds owned, but also is a piece of lingerie. And lingerie, again, is one of my biggest passions. I love film. So it just was a trifecta and a perfect melting pot of everything that I love and that I wanted to have in my shop. Now, I went back and forth, bid on it. I won, and I could not believe I won, but I knew that when I purchased it, I had some digging to do because I didn't know a lot about this bra. I knew MGM, Debbie Reynolds, that was it. So before I actually received it, I analyzed every single photo that was in the auction listing, and it had these scene numbers written on the inside of the tag. Now, I went back and found, I don't know if it was on Reddit or maybe it was on one of the eBay forums, but years ago, another seller and buyer had asked the same question, that they had a coat that I believe at the time may have been worn by Rock Hudson. Not positive. My memory's a little fuzzy on that, but it had MGM and call numbers and scene numbers written in the inside tag. And someone said that those were to ensure with continuity that the costume correlated with the scene that the actor was wearing it in, and they knew that that was the piece that the actor would be wearing. So knowing that knowledge, I typed in all of these numbers, Debbie Reynolds, searching until finally I came to an old expired listing from a Christie's auction of Debbie Reynolds' estate when she passed.
Editing here, I made a mistake. This auction was in 1995, well before Debbie Reynolds passed away. So these were just pieces that had been sold and auctioned off years before, had nothing to do with her estate. That was my bad. Again, my memory on this was a little bit rusty. All right, now back to it.
Now, this listing was for a costume leotard that she had worn in the 1953 film I Love Melvin, starring her Singing in the Rain co star Donald O'Connor. Now, it just said a costume. I think it said a cheerleading costume. And I thought, cheerleading, okay. This scene number and the MGM call number that is on the tag for my bra is also on this same costume. So I knew that at one point in time, this bra also correlated with this costume and was more than likely the undergarment worn under it. So, of course, I watched I Love Melvin, and I got to a very specific scene, and it was a musical scene where you had football players, and Debbie Reynolds was dressed up as a human football, being kicked around, flying in the sky. It's a really cute piece. And the costume that they were talking about in this Christie's article or expired listing was this costume, even though the expired listing didn't have the actual photos anymore. But I was 99.9% sure this was the actual costume. Now, in that scene, her leotard, and I'll post a picture here, and if I can, I'll post maybe some clips, but her costume kind of was a very razorback, almost halter type style that cut very sharp here. And the bra I have cuts in the exact same way so that it would be hidden under the leotard, but also it would be, you know, a bra modesty garment as well. But what really struck me about this bra is that it is made of, it feels more like a cotton linen material, maybe a tiny bit of satin. The elastic is only in the front bust part, but it has zero stretch. So to see her tumbling and doing all these dance moves and acrobatics and knowing that this was the bra she was wearing, and I'm pretty positive she was wearing this bra in other scenes where she had the same cut in some of her clothes during some of her dance scenes. Like, ugh, my chest hurts just thinking about it because how much it would have cut in. Ow. Like, I think we all know if you wear a bra or foundation garment of any type, uh, things like that are not meant to be worn during a lot of activity. But it was really fascinating because this bra, it had sweat stains on it. There was padding in the bust, but it had long since dried and crumbled. And when I purchased it, again, I'm very much of the belief that you leave everything as is and as you purchased it, especially when it is what I consider a historical garment. But due to the crumbling of that inner padding, I knew based on all of the other vintage garments that I have and vintage lingerie that keeping that degraded padding in could also keep harming the garment itself. So luckily, I was very fortunate that the little satchels that this padding was originally in, again, it had some wear and there was a little tiny, about, I would say 6 millimeter opening on the side of each of these satchels that I was able to slowly, it took me a long time to do this, remove the crumbled padding that was in the bra. It was red. It almost looked like that lava rock that you have in your front yard. So I was also afraid of it staining the bra even more than it already had when it was used. So I was able to remove all of this padding so I could ensure that any harm that could come to this bra from this padding was eliminated. But again, that's the only thing I do to any of these garments. Any change I make to it is to preserve the longevity and life of the garment itself. So these are two pieces that I do currently have on display in the shop in the cabinets that I was able to purchase with the grant I got last summer. And I love talking about it. The look of surprise when people come into the store and see these pieces on display in Fargo, North Dakota is amazing. And to have a piece of Debbie Reynolds and Elizabeth Taylor next to me every day when I'm at work is something beyond my wildest dreams and imagination. And I couldn't have done it without my love of vintage and seeing the importance of all of these beautiful garments and jewelry pieces that I have acquired and accumulated since I was a kid, all built up to this moment to where they provided me with the opportunity to get these pieces as my own and be able to share them with everybody who comes into my store. Now, the last item I want to share is another piece from Elizabeth Taylor, and I got this from a separate auction. A lot of the Elizabeth Taylor pieces I found have been in the Hollywood and Legends auctions that are a collaboration between Julian's Auctions and Turner Classic Movies. So those are the auctions where I've gotten all of my Elizabeth Taylor pieces from. And when I saw that there was going to be another one, and they were pieces that were going to be up for auction from one of her former assistants, my ears perked up. Now, during the auction, I saw all of this information on her former assistant. Now, the reason why my ears perked up at this auction is they had multiple pieces of lingerie owned and worn by Elizabeth Taylor. So again, my love of lingerie and my absolute adoration for Elizabeth Taylor. So again, it's that heart pumping, body burning feeling of I need to get one of these. And they're these beautiful peignoir sets. And I'll put up all the ones that were in the auction and the two that I was gunning for. Some were film worn and screen used or more designer. The ones I was going for are still designer bespoke from Jewel Park, but I knew that they were a little bit more in my reach. And I saw that they were from her former assistant, Georgette Stroom, and I knew that there was so much more history behind these pieces than what I knew of. So again, I repeated the same tactic that I did in the previous auction. I had 2 months to prepare for this auction. I wrote a list and categorized and ranked everything that I was gunning for, and I worked accordingly and went into battle with trying to sell some of the pieces that I had accumulated. And as an example of some of the pieces I've sold, again, this kind of probably just marks to how I didn't have an attachment to them anymore, because some of the pieces I sold, I honestly don't remember all of them, which means that it was time for them to go to their new home. It was time for them to be cherished and loved and remembered by someone else. But one piece I remember specifically was this beautiful 1950s cherry red felt poodle circle skirt, and it had a mink poodle on the side of it. Glitter, absolutely gorgeous. I purchased this when I was in college, and I saw it on the Etsy site of Instagram shop I was following, and I had to buy it. And for a college kid who was working 2 jobs, I needed something to represent how hard I was working. I was working as a dishwasher, also in college full time, and working at another retail shop for my second job. So I needed something to get me through how stressful that time was, and that skirt represented this. So I didn't want to sell it. I did and I didn't. It held a sentimental memory of working really hard and working towards something and making this purchase that meant a lot to me, and especially with how hard I'd been working at the time. But I knew it was for a greater good. So I sold that piece and pieces like it that were beautiful, wonderful, but they just needed to move on and find a new home. So the day of the auction came, and again, I had these 2 specific peignoir pieces they didn't have dates on them, but I was able to date them more than likely from the early 70s. And with these listings, the sizes are never put on them. There are no measurements. I believe you can request it, but for me personally, I wasn't going to wear any of them. Obviously, I'm not Elizabeth Taylor, so I wasn't going to be wearing them, so that didn't matter to me. But the size did matter when trying to estimate and age these pieces. Anyone that is familiar or knows Elizabeth Taylor knows she was very human, obviously. She went through weight fluctuations, especially in terms of when she went through addiction struggles. So her weight did correlate to certain periods of time, but I had no way of knowing what size any of these pieces were, and I wouldn't find out until I got them in person. So these 2 pieces, I knew that I couldn't get both. It had to be one or another. And I can't remember exactly, and I probably again talked more about this in the podcast episode, but I really wanted this beautiful violet colored one, and I was going to do whatever I could to get it. Now, there was a bidding war on this one, and I spent more than what I was anticipating, but not as much as it could have gone for in terms of what other pieces had gone for in her collection. But I ended up winning it, barely. And I won it again. It was a Saturday. I had people in the shop, and when I finally got the notification that my bid on this beautiful peignoir set had won, I remember I had to just go and I had to stifle the biggest yelp and tears because I was so beyond excited. Not only did I think, okay, I have one Elizabeth Taylor item, but now I have another, and it's lingerie, and it's a very specific period in time. I cannot explain the excitement. And as a little kid, growing up watching Elizabeth Taylor, reading her biographies when I was in elementary school, and just idolizing this human for everything she had been through, accomplished with AIDS research and advocacy. Even as a kid, I could see and I knew and could appreciate how influential she was and how she used her celebrity to help people and those that she loved. So I knew the significance of this collection that I was acquiring. Now, I purchased this set and waited very patiently as they sent it. And the wonderful thing about Julien's auctions is when you purchase anything from them, you get the bidding card, you get the little bidding tags, and they package them meticulously. And you know that you're getting these pieces in the best condition and they're being shipped with care. So when I received it, that was when my detective work started. Now, I'd already been trying to find out information on Georgette Stroom, but I also wanted to know exactly when this set came from. So when I got it, I was able to look at the size, and it was way more petite than I had expected. Now, in typical Elizabeth Taylor form, the bust was definitely larger, but the waist was very slim and tiny. And I knew that Jewel Park was a bespoke lingerie company. I believe they're still in business today. I don't know if, I think they might only do custom. I'm not positive. If I get any more information, I'll put it up here. But they were custom Jewel Park, and Jewel Park created the beautiful white slip that Elizabeth Taylor wore in the amazing film she did with Paul Newman, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Now, I had to dive into what was happening in Elizabeth Taylor's life at the time that she owned this peignoir set. And I was able to find that the set was more than likely from the early 70s, mainly because she had done another collaboration with Jewel Park for a movie called Ash Wednesday, done in 1973. Now, this was a period where you noticed a lot of interesting film choices, and this one was no exception. And I'd never seen this movie. I had never even heard of it. Definitely not in the Criterion collection of Elizabeth Taylor movies, but it's a very interesting plot, and I'm going to read it to you now because I don't think I could sum it up very well. So, Ash Wednesday, rated R. After getting plastic surgery in Switzerland to help rejuvenate her shaky marriage, Barbara Sawyer has an affair with a younger man while waiting for her husband's arrival from the US. And yes, a lot of it has to deal with her getting plastic surgery to please her husband. Ugh. Definitely not something that I could see Elizabeth Taylor doing in real life, but I suppose at that time, a film is a film and work is work. But at this time, she was still with Richard Burton, and Jewel Park did the lingerie and peignoir sets for this particular film as well. And in the film, I believe one of the peignoir sets that was up for auction, this wasn't one I was going for because it was screen used, was done by Jewel Park. So I knew that these were done in similar styles. They appeared in similar fabrics, and when I looked at the tag from the screen used one, it matched the tag on the peignoir set from Jewel Park that I currently had. So what I deduced from this is Jewel Park created these peignoir sets for the film, and possibly this one I purchased was one that Elizabeth Taylor had commissioned from Jewel Park at the same time for her to take home, because it's in that beautiful violet color. And we all know Elizabeth Taylor is known for her violet eyes, which in fact they were not violet. They were, I believe, more of a gray color, but violet followed her. And this color, I think, really represented the color she knew she was known for. And it's absolutely stunning. Condition on it, again, you could tell this was worn. There's color fading, there is wear to it. This was a piece that she actually wore and used. So deducing all of that, I'm pretty sure that this piece and the set was made specifically for her because, again, Jewel Park had a shop. I think I'll post the exact address of it, but it was in Los Angeles, and she only created bespoke lingerie garments. So this was made specifically for Elizabeth Taylor. Now, how it got to her assistant Georgette Stroom's hands, I had to do even more digging, and I was very lucky that this book, Elizabeth Taylor, The Grit and Glamour of an Icon, had just been published. And I was gonna buy this anyways, because duh. But I saw that the author had done interviews with her former assistant, Georgette Stroom, who owned these pieces. So I bookmarked a bunch of places where Georgette was interviewed just so I could learn a little bit more about her. Now, I know that she is an artist and she's known for creating these beautiful masks that in the book it says that she would make for Elizabeth because Elizabeth really loved her art and I think really was encouraging of it. Sounds like she was someone that when she loved you and you were in her orbit, she fostered your creativity and wanted you to do what you were meant to do, which was really wonderful. And again, everything that you think she would be and more. But in here, it said that Georgette Stroom worked for Elizabeth from 1984 to 1993, which I feel like is a pretty good period of time. And I believe, let me skip forward a little bit. It's been about a year since I've read this book and gone over a little bit of bookmarks. Now, there are multiple mentions of Georgette in this specific book, but from what she said, Elizabeth would often give articles of clothing to people that worked for her, her friends, clothes that she didn't see any need for anymore, wanted to pass on. So it appears that's why Georgette got a lot of these pieces. Now, I did get another piece, and it's this beautiful blazer, but that'll be a part of another video. But it was really interesting to go through and read this book. And again, this is not a promotion for anything. I bought this book on my own. I love it. It is probably the best biography of Elizabeth Taylor because it talks to more people that knew her, loved her, her kids, but also letters that she wrote herself. And it really is a very raw look at her life and how she felt. It's not sanitized. It's very, very raw and emotional. And I love this book. I was really sad when I got to the end of it. I couldn't put it down and just blew through this book immediately. But this really was the last puzzle piece to this peignoir set and being able to date it and know more information about Georgette. Now, again, Georgette, I found her Facebook page and I've always been meaning to reach out and just actually ask about it. But my Midwest shyness and need to not bother people is very strong. So this book is going to have to do for now. Now, I have to say that these pieces, it's still, even so much time has passed since I purchased them, I still have a hard time believing that I own them. They don't really feel like they belong to me. I do feel more of like a caretaker for them. And that feeling I don't think will ever go away. But just to know that something that just touched her and was in her vicinity is now in my hands is exhilarating, but really, really frightening at the same time, because to get so close to someone that has meant so much to you throughout your life and childhood, it can be a scary feeling. And I know I've had people say they're just clothes, it's just a person. And yes, they are a person and it is clothing, but it's not just that. It's history. It's this person and their life around it. As I said, she was still with Richard Burton at the time that she had this peignoir set, from what I've deduced. Again, this is all from what I've been able to figure out from reading and dating the specific garments. But you read in the book that was a very tumultuous time. She was going through a lot. And we all know that there are pieces that hold a lot of sentimental value to us, especially when we have them and are wearing them at a very important time in our lives. But I love them. Even if these pieces meant nothing to her, they mean something to me, and it is a complete honor to own anything from her, period. Now, I was joking with a customer the other day who was looking at the cabinet that I have the green coat and Debbie Reynolds bra in, and they joked, "Oh, who would have ever known you would have Debbie Reynolds and Elizabeth Taylor in the same cabinet," knowing that they had this rivalry, very similar to, people have compared it to the Brad Pitt, Jennifer Aniston, and Angelina Jolie triangle of our modern time. And in terms of media blitz and the media consumption of it, yeah, it was very similar, but the situation was greatly different. Elizabeth Taylor had just recently tragically lost her husband, Michael Todd, in a very tragic and devastating plane crash. Eddie Fisher was married to her MGM friend, Debbie Reynolds, but Eddie Fisher was also best friends with Mike Todd. So there's a lot of complexity there. And yes, there were, from what I read, even from Elizabeth Taylor and Debbie Reynolds, there was a little bit of bad blood, but I think what both women tended to agree was that Eddie Fisher was the asshole and kind of took advantage of the situation. But both of them, Debbie Reynolds and Elizabeth Taylor, did a movie in, I believe it was it the late 80s or early 90s, called These Old Broads, with Shirley MacLaine and Joan Collins. And they buried the hatchet, and it was just wonderful. It was wonderful to see them come back together. And I think enough time had passed. They'd been through a lot since then to where that was completely water under the bridge. And if I remember correctly, Debbie Reynolds said that she did talk to Elizabeth Taylor not long before she passed. And Elizabeth Taylor told her that she was pretty sure the end was coming, which it's really touching. And of course, Debbie Reynolds passed away not long after that, after her daughter, Carrie Fisher, unexpectedly and tragically passed away. Now, again, I am a broken record with this, but I go into much more detail about the back history and story of a lot of these things in my podcast episode. The memory then was fresh. This, I'm just running on pure excitement for having these pieces. So if you want to know more information about the pieces I just talked about, I will post the podcast episode or episodes down below. So if you want to listen to them and learn a little bit more, now you'll have this visual representation to kind of guide you as you're listening along to that. Now, in the next video, and I've been trying to make these videos where I can, but running the shop by myself and getting ready for the spring and summer tourist season, I'll be going back to doing 6 days a week at the shop. So I'll get these videos out as I can. I have been really struggling to get them out lately, and life, am I right? Life lately is a struggle, but I really wanted to get this one out. And I have to say my hope for having these pieces on display in the shop has been fulfilled. People have been coming in and wanting to learn more, even if they don't know who Elizabeth Taylor or Debbie Reynolds are. When I start talking about them, they immediately brighten and can't wait to find out more. If they're already fans, they just can't believe they can actually be in the presence of something that touched these two remarkable and amazing women. And I love conversations. I love getting people excited about things that are tangible and in person in front of them and not just on a screen. So having them in person has meant everything. And I am just beyond honored to be the caretaker of these pieces now. Again, I thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed seeing these pieces. And if you listen to the podcast episode, and if you check out our online archive and information about these pieces, let me know what you think. Have you purchased anything from Julian's Auctions? Do you own any celebrity or Hollywood memorabilia? I would love to know. This is a topic that fascinates me. I grew up loving classic films, Hollywood legends and icons. So this has just been amazing and mind-blowing, and I still can't completely wrap my head around it. So I'd love to know and really appreciate you coming back and watching. It really does mean a lot. And I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you so much again, and I will see you next time.